Welcome to Realms Unknown, a sci-fi and fantasy podcast brought to you by The Bugle. A nobleman lies sprawled across a summoning circle, rich velvet waistcoat sliced open, lying spread beneath his sprawled arms like bat wings, his chest carved open in precise, almost surgical strokes. The blood isn't just pooled on the floor, it's flowing into channels carved into the hardwood. It is writing, writhing glyphs that twist away from comprehension like worms in sunlight. The city guards mutter about demons or rogue mages. There are already pogroms in the wizard quarter. But none of them see what Theron Valoc sees. Theron, lean, sharp-eyed, fingers drumming in erratic rhythm against his thigh, stands at the edge of the pool of blood, smiling faintly to stop anyone approaching him. He finds if he holds a faint smile on his face, particularly in the midst of hideously violent chaos, people are unlikely to want to bother him, so he's trained his face to do it while he's thinking. His mind is a storm of details, the scent of burnt ozone, the way the victim's left boot is worn down in one accustomed way but slightly scuffed afresh as though he'd changed the way he walked in just the last few days. The itchy familiarity of the third glyph in the blood-stripped wooden floor. His mind absently runs through how much of a hassle it would be to sand down that hardwood, how the owners will have to decide between stains and demonic script or a big old dip in the floor. You'd never match these boards and the labour costs would be obscene. He doesn't just observe, he consumes the scene piece by piece until the pattern begins to make a drumbeat in his temple. The captain of the guard scrubs his thick fingers through his salt and pepper hair. Another murder, and this time a nobleman. The amount of angry assholes in golden boots that are about to descend on my head. I do not get paid enough for this shit. No, smiled Theron. This isn't just a murder. It's the first move in a game. And that game is Realms Unknown. Yes, you've just entered Realms Unknown, a weekly speculative fiction podcast brought to you by The Bugle, in which we discuss science fiction, fantasy tropes, the newest news, our favorite old shows, books, games, and more. I'm your host, published author and comedian Alice Fraser, and my companion on this journey, the Watson to my Sherlock Holmes, the Spock to my Kirk, the Data to my Picard, the River Tam to my Malcolm Reynolds, the Entraptor to my Hordak, the Donatello to my Michelangelo. It is Tom Neenan. Welcome.
Hello, thank you so much for having me once again on Realms Unknown. A lot of those people weren't just like sidekicks, they were equals. So I feel very honoured that you were, Holmes and Watson, Watson's a sidekick. When it comes to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I don't know what the power structure was there. Was there a leader? Or, because they're all introduced sort of the same.
Was there a leader?
Officially.
We need to get into some Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles lore, my friend. Is there an order? Yes, of course. We have Leonardo on katanas, Raphael, who has the sai, Donatello, who has the bow staff, and Michelangelo, who has the nunchucks. Michelangelo is the sort of slightly ADHD one. Leonardo is a little bit more rule-bound, possibly pattern recognition and very high conscientiousness character.
Right.
And the others play their various parts.
I think it's just strange for me to think that they had like an internal kind of hierarchy when it seems more like it seems a bit more socialist what's going down in the sewers for the turtles, but maybe that's a conversation for another time.
But I feel like even in socialism, any family has a sibling birth order sort of situation going on.
Fair enough.
And that brings us to the news section. The news this week is that there is a new trailer out for a new Frankenstein. Have you seen it, Tom Neenan? It looks exciting to me.
I have indeed. I'm very excited by this. I'm excited by the fact it doesn't seem to be like making it modern or like, trying to do anything really other than just tell the story of Frankenstein. Apparently, even with the kind of the circles of narrative as well. Like we start on the ice, as I believe the from memory the book does. And it's just going to be a very faithful retelling, but with Guillermo del Toro's kind of unique spin on things, which I think is really exciting. I really enjoyed Nosferatu. That was just like a very, faithful telling of that story. So yeah, I can't wait. And Jacob Elordi, is he going to be a big sexy Frankenstein?
Well, this is the real question, because you have a couple of elements here, which is you've got a very beautiful nested storytelling in the original book with sort of letters and then stories being told to various people. And then you also have the idea that the monster is meant to be very beautiful, but sort of upsetting looking. There's that kind of slightly uncanny valley thing, which you could do interesting stuff with. But I'm excited. I'm excited. I'm giving it time to percolate, and I hope that it will be good. But I think I will watch that.
I think nothing describes Jacob Elordi sort of more than, yeah, slightly terrifying and beautiful at the same time. Like, isn't he like 9 foot tall? And he's like, his features are almost too angular to be human. Like, he's just so sort of handsome and broad and terrifying. That I think it's amazing casting. And yeah, I can't wait to see what he does, because the trailer hides his face, right? We just know there's just this hulking great creature that's throwing people around a ship.
Yes, and that he's sort of whacking them in that. So I'm worried that that will be, and his voice isn't very beautiful. So I'm interested. I'm hoping that it will be good. I mean, Jacob
Mhm.
Elordi really has done humanity a service to go into films rather than just being a jaw chiseling online influencer for insecure young men, teaching them like to chew extra sticky gum to make themselves as beautiful as him.
Oh god, yeah.
In other news, Hulu is doing a new Predator movie, Killer of Killers. Does Predator count as science fiction, or is it moved into a realm of its own, Tom?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's now sort of a big franchise thing, and I think it's definitely still counts as science fiction. I really loved Prey. Prey was very exciting and a new spin on things that sort of managed to evade that thing of being like woke nonsense, even though like the main character is a very strong, indigenous lady, but people just seem to. Apparently, if you're sort of if it's good and entertaining, people then ignore that it's box ticking or whatever in inverted commas. So no, I really like the way the Predator franchise is going, and I'm really excited for this as well. I am basically, if it's got an alien, a Jurassic Park, or a Predator in it, you've sold a ticket to me. So I'm gonna have a great time, whatever.
Yeah, I do think it does stretch the bounds of what might be counted as science fiction. Um,
In what sense? It's Predator. It's a terrifying, isn't it? Just an alien.
I think, I mean, just genre-wise, I feel like it spans the premise is science fiction, but the aesthetics of the genre choices are like horror/action, if you know what I mean.
Right. Okay. Yeah. 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 Fair enough.
What I mean is it's sort of technically science fiction, but it doesn't feel like science fiction.
Really, like well, science fiction is a very kind of premise based genre, isn't it? It's all sort of very thinky, and it comes up with like a new premise that it presents you, and the premise here is what if big scary thing, and yeah, that is also horror, isn't it? So that crosses over into those things.
Yeah, for sure. I've also got this news, which might be slightly unsettling to our listeners, and this is from physics.org, which is the theory, which has been propounded by a legitimate scientist, that gravity might be proof that the world is a simulation. That gravity isn't necessarily proof of a natural law, it might just be proof of a kind of a coding system, and therefore that the world might be made up of code. Do you tend to buy into these theories that the world could be a simulation?
Not really. I've just seen the film Mountainhead, which is about sort of tech bros all kind of being obnoxious in a sort of a wintry retreat. And there's a bit of like, oh, we're in a simulation, and that discussion in there. I think it tends to be for people who sort of maybe have the ability to fix people's problems, but don't want to because it's not cool to house the homeless when you could be talking about making people have digital lives and live forever. So I thought that all that simulation talk I just find a bit obnoxious. Also, I'm yet to see anything that doesn't have some glitches, and if that is the case, then why isn't gravity glitching occasionally? Or is it? Are we seeing weird gravity glitches that we can't discuss? Like, yeah, like the other day I lost like half a stone within like 3 days, which I think is impossible. So maybe that is a case of gravity glitching. I don't know.
I mean, how much fiber were you eating?
Yeah, I was very nervous that whole day. No, I wouldn't we just see like buildings floating up into the air or something, or just anything that indicated that maybe the simulation wasn't 100% perfect?
Well, I mean, basically the argument, as far as I can tell, boils down to when I have this conversation with people. Well, how can you prove that it's not a simulation? And actually, a lot of the ways that simulations work could be like analogies or metaphors placed over the world, and that would make sense of the world. And then I was like, they used to believe in homunculi, tiny little men sitting in your head running, and the whatever technology is the most advanced technology gives us frameworks for understanding the things that we can't really understand, which are,
Yes.
even more sophisticated than the best machines that we have, the human brain and the physics of the universe. So
Mhm.
I just sort of think, the people who say it's a simulation will be thinking it's a flibbity-gibbet when we have invented flibbity-gibbets, because
Yes.
flibbity-gibbets give the idea. It's basically just saying, but maybe God, really,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's the same logic anyway.
And also the person saying that also is in the God position. Like the people who make simulations and things like that are the ones who go, maybe we're in a simulation and then someone like me is God. It's sort of like the way that Shakespeare said, no, like, life is a play and the people merely players. And me, Shakespeare, I'm God and I tell them what to do and where to go.
Yeah, so how my daughter turned to me and said, "How do we know we're not all Play-Doh?"
Yeah. Exactly.
And that brings us to our ad section. Your ad section now, as you teeter on the event horizon of your own poor choices, let us serve you a series of options for temporarily pre-soothing your shame and guilt at buying those services. And this episode of the podcast is brought to you by the I Hate Touch armor set for the warrior who'd rather fight a troll than endure a pat on the back. Lightweight, full coverage, and zero irritating seams. Now with optional Don't Hug Me force field upgrade. And when you want to hold something so you don't have to talk, half a glass of water. And this episode of the podcast is brought to you by Orcish Rejection Sensitivity Training. Did someone side-eye your battle axe collection? Our thick skin potion helps orcs and sensitive warlocks handle criticism without raising any villages you weren't already intending to raise. That's Orcish Rejection Sensitivity Training, available online now. And this episode of the podcast is brought to you by the Overstimulation Force Field. Sensory overload in a neon spaceport. Oh, cursed flesh prison of twitching synapses. Let our sentient spandex anti-everything null field and sexy catsuit emancipate you from the relentless bombardment of the mundane. It walks, it breathes, it nods along to your captain's droning speeches, all while your soul floats blissfully in the abstract ether. Activate this personal-impersonal envelope to mute all sounds, lights, people, and unsolicited hologram ads. Side effects can include detaching from reality, connecting to the void, creating a black hole, and chafing. Does not block the telepathic screaming of the child clones.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Sparking Consoles. Want to show your ship or machine is damaged in a new and exciting way? Try Sparking Consoles. Imagine your laptop started sparking. That would be terrifying, right? You'd never be able to use that laptop ever again. But with Sparking Consoles, your operation terminal can apparently suffer multiple little explosions and still perform essential functions, while also dramatically highlighting that it has been damaged. Sparking Consoles. It's an error message, but camp.
Tom, what have you been watching or listening to of late?
Right. Okay, I'm going to dive into this, and it might not be popular, it might be very popular. We'll see what people have to say. A new series of Rick and Morty started recently, and I watched the first episode, and it made me laugh. And I was able to enjoy it, I think, because separating art from the artist, etc. Even though the artist in question, who we're meant to separate it from, is no longer around and is no longer voicing the characters, and also separating the art from the fandom, which I know has also become toxic. So it was the first episode, and it was to do with Summer and Morty have been trapped in a matrix for way longer than they were meant to. A simulation, with the very distinct purpose of teaching them not to take people's charges. And it was I really enjoyed it. And I had sort of been conditioned in my head because I'd sort of forgotten about all of the melee around sort of the obnoxious fans and the obnoxious talent involved, and was just able to enjoy it for being a funny show that will tease comedy from sci-fi concepts. We'll set up sort of quite a tropey sci-fi concept, but then sort of explore it to its nth degree, which is sort of what the fun of comedy is. I remember there's one episode where they have one of them is given a lightsaber, drops it face down, and so the lightsaber just starts eating through the earth. Because as far as I know, nothing stops a lightsaber apart from another lightsaber. So just fun things where they look at a sci-fi concept and then look at it from a few different angles and find out what the fun of it could be. And it was really fun to enjoy it, divorced from kind of the toxicity that I think once surrounded that show, and seems to have sort of dissipated a bit now. And I don't think that's the fault necessarily of any of the creatives involved. I think it's just sometimes if you have something that's like popular with certain groups of people, that happens. Anyway, it was a real joy to be able to just enjoy it, enjoy the sci-fi, enjoy the comedy, and sort of not feel too icky about it. And I'm really enjoying this series. So that's my recommendation and what I've been watching.
I think I have sort of missed a lot of the discourse about Rick and Morty, and it's also not a
Mm.
show that I ever was super into, so I didn't kind of get rejected. It just sort of comes in my way occasionally when
Mhm.
someone else is watching it, and I
Mhm.
enjoy it when that happens,
Yeah.
but not quite enough. I'm always like, "Oh, that's very funny and clever," but not quite
Mm.
enough to then seek it out on my own. That is not a diss on Rick and Morty, by the way. I
Mhm.
never seek anything out on my own. I'm incapable of watching anything on my own. I can only ever watch things with other people. It is a failing of mine.
Fair enough.
I started watching The Handmaid's Tale with a friend, and then, 2 episodes in, he was like, "Oh, women and children suffering, I can't do it." And I was like, "Oh, I could watch some more of that," and then I
Mm.
never did. I have been rereading Blood Song by Anthony Ryan, which is, sort of the Raven's Shadow series. It's a epic fantasy, slightly on the grim dark side, but it's got a Valen Alsorna. If you like, Robin Hobb, you
Mhm.
will probably like this book, and I enjoyed it enough to reread it. It's a lot of fun, and then the other thing that I've been reading is having done the Murderbot series by Martha Wells, I read another of her books, which is Witch King.
Mm.
I'm only a couple of chapters in, but I have been enjoying that so far. I'm not quite through it far enough to recommend it, but I will say I have been enjoying it so far. So good.
What's her so I haven't seen the series or read the books of Murderbot. It seems fun, it seems quirky. Is she sort of does she bring sort of a fun twist to sort of the fantasy genre, or is it quite straight down the line?
So Murderbot is a sort of half bot, half human construct that is used as a security unit and has hacked its own governor module, which is used to control these hybrid bot people. And then he sort of pretends not to be free for a while, and then eventually starts taking autonomous action. He's deeply socially awkward, doesn't like making eye contact. He's sort of got this very funny inner voice, and the way that he interacts with stupid humans who keep trying to get themselves killed when his job is to not get them killed, and then the way he sort of fights and denies the fact that he does have this protective instinct towards human, and that there are humans who he actually does like. And then also, I mean, I say he, it's an it. It has no gender, it has no sexuality,
Mm.
and it thinks of itself as Murderbot because it has been involved in killing humans sort of against its will, and sort of the
Mhm.
ethics of that, and then making choices and making decisions and taking responsibility for those decisions and deciding whether it is human in any way and whether it is bot or not or something in between is a lot of the fun. It's very cool and cute and fun, and I have only seen one episode of the show, which is very
Mm.
well done in terms of like production values, and the Skarsgård at the head of it is very handsome, and they carry on that character fairly well. It is a good murder bot, but the humans around it are all really stupid and annoying, and that's sort of not the point of the book, because the point of the
Right.
books is that he starts to meet humans that aren't stupid and annoying. And some of the characters that they've cast are not meant to be this stupid and annoying. And it feels like just a slight misreading, maybe, from
Mhm.
somebody who was in the middle of doing the turning it from a book into a television show. But I enjoyed
Interesting.
it. I think it's fun. I think you would enjoy the books, definitely, and then I would say books first, then show. That would be my
Nice.
recommendation.
Always a good order, I think, for those things.
The next thing that we are going to do is Trope on a Rope. Trope on a Rope is where we talk about a trope that we love or hate or love to hate. Every time we encounter it, we notice it. Tom Neenan, what is your Trope on a Rope for this week?
My trope on a rope is that, and I'm trying to give it sort of a cool, sort of a name that is catchy, but I'm sort of failed. But basically, the Guillermo del Toro sort of blind humanoids. Basically, I'm seeing a lot more recently that Guillermo del Toro amazing aesthetic that he creates, where it's sort of folkloric monsters, but also sympathetic monsters that are quite vulnerable. And he made a lot of these, and I've seen them popping up a lot recently. The series finale of Doctor Who, that everyone take a shot, was the other day, and they had these creatures that were almost like made of porcelain, but had like a black kind of goggle thing and were attached to a goo, and the whole thing felt very Guillermo del Toro. I'm not explaining them very well, but they were basically they're sort of glitch sensors of this simulation, and they had like this porcelain skin. What's the Japanese art where they fix broken pottery with gold?
Kintsugi.
Yes, thank you. It was very much like it represented that really, just these kind of cracks in the skin, but this very sort of alabaster kind of thing. And it's sort of once again Jacob Elordi. It's the beauty combined with the slightly eerie that I think that Guillermo del Toro sort of pioneered. But you see it happening more and more. Lady Gaga used a bit of that kind of aesthetic as well, I think, sort of for some of her stage shows. Just seeing a lot more, basically, the kind of the blind Guillermo del Toro humanoid monster. I don't hate it. Anytime it turns up, I'm like, great, they're using the trope that I enjoy.
Well, my trope on a rope this week
Mm.
is a sort of excessively stoic masculinity. The absolute worst result of modern depictions of masculinity as inherently sort of emotionless might be the
Mm.
terrible mental health cost, but I think definitely the second worst is how bad it makes action movies, you
Mhm.
know? It's got all these blank-faced, steroid-bodied men deadpanning their way through CGI explosions. There's no impact, there's no sense of, that they care in any way. I feel like just cry a bit, you lumpy is what I'm saying. They need to express some emotion, otherwise I just can't care. Like, the last great action hero to me was Bruce Willis because he was like, "Ha, oof, oh," ow.
It is strange, isn't it, how people forgot that seeing the impact of it, be it your Indiana Jones or even watching the most recent Mission Impossible, Ethan Hunt is scared and is in pain and is sort of trying to work things out on the hoof. And that's what is fun about action films, is the fact that these people aren't superhuman. And like you say, Bruce Willis, up until I think maybe the last Die Hard film, was always out of his depth. And as viewers, we enjoy the fact that we're watching someone out of their depth adapt and try and improve and try and work out what they're doing, other than just being perfect already and then effortlessly defeating everyone around them.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the worst sort of, recent example I saw of this was the League of Something Gentlemen. It was the one with Superman in it, what's his face? Henry Cavill, and
Oh,
and
yes.
a bunch of and it was, they're trying to be sort of the Expendables nouveau, but it was meant to be the starting of the special forces guys, and they're all getting sort of tortured and blown up and going through extreme sort of situations of danger, and they're all just like one eyebrow up, a ba 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 ba, a banter, banter, banter.
Mm,
And you're like, "Okay, maybe you make it clear that the way that they cope with these terrible situations is by pretending to be stoic and bantering, but we need to see that there's some effort because otherwise it just looks like they're bad actors or they're
yes, yeah.
too good at acting like nothing is happening." Um,
That's the thing. I think you still see Tom Cruise panicked and you still see him like worried, and you need a bit of that to essentially sort of nail the stakes of what's happening, because if everyone's quipping all the time, everything is has no weight. Everything's kind of just sort of floating, and it doesn't make for entertaining cinema.
no, it does not. That brings us to our subgenre deep dive, which for this week is neurodivergent heroes.
Mm.
Now, neurodivergent heroes is, I think, so so everywhere that it's difficult
Mhm.
to really pin it down. But I'm going to start us on Sherlock Holmes,
Okay.
who is clearly neurodivergent. He's hyperfixated. He's got these coping mechanisms. He self-medicates with his violin and with his cocaine. You see him as contrasted to Watson, who is the most neurotypical person you could possibly imagine for someone who follows him around. This week I have not, because as you can probably hear in my voice, I'm a little bit sick. I have not put up the post where I've asked for requests, but I'm going to put that up after we record. So if you
Uh-huh.
want a longer list of recommendations of books and films and movies, television shows and games that have neurodivergent heroes, you can head over to the Blue Sky or over to my Patreon and find other people's recommendations to extend this reading list. Tom Neenan, do you have a favorite neurodivergent heroes book?
I do. Now this may not actually fall into out the kind of thing that we cover, but I was discussing it the other day, and I am a huge fan of both the books and the television series of Bones. And if you haven't seen Bones, it is the story of Temperance Brennan, who, like a lot of neurodivergent heroes, sort of evades diagnosis because it's always more fun to have a very elastic definition of what like you say, hyperfixated. They're a genius, but in this very specific way where maybe socially they're not as adept. And Temperance Brennan as Bones, written by Kathy Reichs, writes the books, and they are a lot of fun. She is just a very fun person who can't. There's a great scene I remember in one of the TV episodes where she has to entertain a child, and she's there doing this, wiggling her fingers at the child and saying dancing phalanges," and it's just a lovely. She's consistently characterized. That's what I really like about Bones is she is very consistently characterized throughout the whole series as having this fixation on sort of, on the structure of the body and things, and not being very good at the soft science as it is. It makes for a very compelling character because actually they've thought about how she would interact with things. And yeah, there's like 15 series of Bones. They're all really fun. They get a bit silly towards the end, and there's definitely sci-fi elements because they use technology that doesn't exist in the real world. But yeah, Kathy Reichs's Temperance Brennan is probably my favorite.
Excellent. I mean, I'm going to expound a little bit more on what the subgenre deep dive does here,
Mm.
which I think the use of neurodivergent heroes is often because it's useful to have a main character who is an outsider who observes the world in ways that others cannot. It is
Mhm.
also, let's say, that many writers of creative and speculative fiction are maybe themselves outsiders who observe the world in ways that others cannot, as I say
Mm.
about, the rash of, comedians coming out with ADHD diagnoses. The job is a diagnosis. Like, there are certain fields that draw certain people in,
Mhm.
um, but I think, it allows you to play, first of all, with a very powerful drive, whether it's a hyperfixation or a difference in the character that can motivate them through the plot where others would give up, where others would
Mhm.
be turned aside by authority or structures. These characters are compelled to push through by their differences. Of course, it can be done incredibly badly and tokenistically, where, for example, an autism coded character has their autism treated like a superpower. And I'm
Mhm.
sure we're all familiar with that and the ways
Mhm.
in which that can sort of slightly dehumanize the people for whom their autism diagnoses are like really annoying and difficult in their
Yeah.
day to day lives. But, I was thinking about this in the context of Murderbot, who is,
Mm.
negotiating being very human and, like, socially awkward and using its botness as a defense against the social
Nice.
awkwardness and its emotions. It sort of resents its emotions, and it can't control its facial expressions, for example, and so it prefers to look at the people around it with its drones rather than make eye contact because it
Oh,
feels like it's
wow.
more in control.
So in that case, the neurodivergence is a divergence from is actually more towards normality. Like the divergence is towards a more kind of, I don't want to say normality in it, but a more kind of, I don't know what's the correct word, but a sort of more traditional way of interacting with the world, kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, and I prefer obviously, I prefer narratives where you have, like, nicely rounded characters that move beyond a kind of tragic genius or socially inept savant
Mhm.
ends of the spectrum. I would
Mm.
say a really interesting way that this is done is in A Drop of Corruption by Robert Jackson Bennett, where it is the fairly autistic coded detective character who is overstimulated by the world, wears a blindfold, um, and sort of has these kind of hyperfixations and pattern recognition dialed up to 100, but is also
Mhm.
a character who is irritable and vulnerable and human and generous and annoying and prickly and over curious in ways that feel much more kind of well-rounded,
Mhm.
even than perhaps a Sherlock Holmes type character. And I know I've mentioned A Drop of Corruption before. That is partly because I'm trying not to give people too long to be read lists in these recommendations.
I think sometimes as well, anything that acknowledges that And neurodivergence that allows you to have these hyperfixations also is like anything that acknowledges the debilitation is helpful because it makes it not just seem like, as you say, a superpower. I really like the fact that in the Monk series, the OCD detective Monk, played by Tony Shalhoub, that he has like a carer, he has someone who looks after him because otherwise he just becomes like, oh, I'm just a brilliant man who doesn't like getting his hands dirty, as opposed to someone who sort of does find day to day living very, very hard. And it doesn't focus on that all the time. It is still a fun, detective show, but just nods to the fact that, yeah, that you will also this will also make life very difficult for you, and normal things might take extra effort. I always think is quite good to include.
Well, it also fundamentally comes down to, I think sort of narrative structure and the function of characters. Like every manic pixie dream girl has ADHD, functionally speaking, because that's
Mm.
what they do in the plot is they bounce from one thing to another. It's very cute and adorable. And it's partly just our current culture's fixation on categorizing different brain types as diagnoses. That means that we sort of,
Mhm.
other those brain characteristics. And you have the ADHD type and you have the OCD type and you have but partly that also is just it's quite useful to have very strong character types who are compelled to act in certain ways. So I think,
Mhm.
I don't wanna hold authors necessarily or filmmakers necessarily to too high a standard for representation because, of course, characters need to be flat to some degree, otherwise you're just watching a documentary.
Yeah,
But I think
yeah.
modern books, maybe in the last 10 years, where they're sort of using these characters with an eye to some level of conscious representation, can probably be held to a higher standard, rather than just sort of going, "Oh, yeah, Sherlock Holmes has clearly got something."
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think that I want to limit the phrase "on the spectrum," or I heard someone say "on the sphere," on television recently. It just feels like a very catch-all thing that doesn't require much, "Oh, well, it's this," and it's very hand-wavy. And I think the more specific and the more, attention you can pay to that, both fiction and the wider world will benefit.
Yeah, and it's also just fun. I mean, you've got like, for example, it's such a useful dynamic to have. You've got Kirk and Spock, and all of the Vulcans are essentially coded as rule following, pattern recognition, emotionless except when they're in Ponfar. And
Mm.
likewise, then you've got Picard and Data performs a similar function, although obviously much less sophisticated and more innocent, of being the person to whom you get to
Mhm.
explain otherwise, things that
Yes.
you might have it allows you to do an exposition dump where your person who's observing subtle patterns gets to explain to the normie what's going on, or your person who doesn't understand, dynamics or social rules in a world that you have invented that has dynamics and social rules, you get to explain it to them explicitly. If everybody else knows what's going on, you don't really have an opportunity to do that in a way that isn't like, "Hello, brother, how long has it been since our father left us here on this island?" You know?
The example that I always use, which Russell T Davies once mentioned on a TV show, is "Happy Wedding Day, sis," which is all the information you need immediately. No one ever speaks like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, there was a scene in, the Wheel of Time television series in which the queen a queen of, Andor has her rivals executed and just as by their own courts in order to
Mm.
consolidate her power, and as one of them, a young lady is getting her throat slit, she says, "Brother?" And you're like, "That's not what you'd say."
No.
But yeah, it makes it easier to do exposition to have characters who are, whose minds only work in particular ways or in ways that require them to engage with the world in a different way. So if you have recommendations for
Mhm.
neurodivergent heroes that you think are particularly well done or particularly badly done, please, seek us out either on Blue Sky, where we're Realms Unknown at Blue Sky, or on the Patreon, where I do a post where I ask for your recommendations.
I always feel sorry for the actors who, it's a really fun part to do, the kind of the, neurodivergent, I'd imagine if you're playing like Crichton, Robert Llewellyn as Crichton or those kind of things, but I'd imagine it's quite galling seeing the script, which is a block of text that long that you have to learn, and then the cool guy gets to say something like, "In English, please," and then be like that, "Yeah, he's so cool." It's like, yeah, I had to learn 4 pages of exposition, but they do God's work. So well done, guys.
I have to say, I never understood the role of the lady who says what the computer just said until I had children. Um, so much of the job of parenting is sort of
Mm.
translating the way that your children say things in ways that other people can understand, and also consolidating their understanding of language. You're repeating one thing to another, and then an
Mhm.
adult will say something, and you repeat it to your child in exactly the same words, and your child won't pay attention to a random adult saying it. So, yeah, there you go.
Amazing.
And that brings us to the Minds of where we discuss a piece of fiction, movie, television show, book, game, etc. that we loved or enjoyed, and the bit of it that makes us, looking back on it, maybe feel a little bit about it. Tom Neenan, have you been in the minds of
I have. No, this isn't a particular. I just want to talk about a film that I am very intrigued by because it came under a lot of discussion. A lot of people saying it's a bit cringe or whatever. I think it's fascinating. It's a film called Passengers, the Chris Pratt and Jennifer Lawrence film that came out a few years ago. Also stars Michael Sheen, and basically the if you don't know the sort of the plot of Passengers, it's about people on this long voyage going to a distant universe or whatever, and yeah, Chris Pratt sort of is accidentally woken up from this hypersleep for which he was meant to be for the next sort of 50, 60 years and can't get back to sleep and is sort of slowly driven mad. And in that time, sort of falls in love with Jennifer Lawrence, who is still in hypersleep. And the original sin of the film, the kind of the moment that everyone sort of says, oh, okay, this is crossing a line, is he wakes her up so he can be with her and then she is stuck with him. And it's sort of a romantic film that then has to have an element of like, oh, they've got to fix the ship because the ship isn't working and all this stuff, sort of to justify why they both need to be back engineer, why they both need to be awake, and why they've saved everyone else, kind of thing. But obviously, what people really don't like is the fact that Chris Pratt wakes her up again. You know, no consent can be given; she is unconscious because he sort of fancies her basically. And I saw a really good YouTube article and a few people talking about this. YouTube article, YouTube essay, where people are saying it's an amazing horror film if it's told from Jennifer Lawrence's perspective, which is if she wakes up and oh goodness, I'm the only person awake on this ship. Then she meets this other person. They're like, oh my god, you woke up too. They start a relationship because I mean, what else are you gonna do on a ship where no one else is?
He is the last man on earth by definition.
Exactly. And then you find out that actually this isn't some chance thing, that he woke you up and he has sentenced you basically to death because you'll be dead before you reach, or you're going to die on this starship before it reaches its destination. And then the whole film becomes maybe like her trying to, she realizes this, she realizes he's manipulative. And actually what you end up with is a really good psychological thriller, sort of like Speak No Evil, which I saw quite recently, which is sort of, oh, something's off here, and yeah, they piece that together. And it's a really intriguing film that actually I think does what a lot of science fiction should do, which is promote a lot of questions. And obviously you'll never make that film with Jennifer Lawrence and Chris Pratt because people don't want to see they want to see those two people falling in love. They don't want to see that, happening that way. It would be a more interesting film maybe if it was Jennifer Lawrence and like Steve Buscemi or someone where like she falls in love with Steve Buscemi and, who's not a traditionally Hollywood leading man material, but if you were to be alone in space forever, I'm sure you would find him very attractive. And then suddenly he turns and he's, the psychopath who woke her up. So what I'm sort of saying is that it's not necessarily. I think it's a decent film, and I think it's a lot of people were sort of very against it at the time. I quite enjoyed it, but it's always worth it. So much science fiction, those ideas are about turning ideas and examining them, and I think that this is an example where technically an for some people is sort of an angle away from becoming actually a really intriguing premise. And I also wanted to throw that open to listeners to go, like, is there any other film, book where sort of if you look at it from a slightly different angle, it either changes genre, it becomes scary rather than funny, it becomes romantic rather than terrifying. I don't know. That I just wanted to throw that out there as a thought because a lot of people had that reaction to Passengers and I didn't, but I think that examining it can sort of yield a more interesting narrative, if that makes sense.
See, I did to some degree because I thought it was an easy fix in the script if you wanted it to be, which is you
Mm,
could have him falling in love with her and fantasizing about her and sort of watching her videos, and then have him sort of go really mad and engage in some self-harm, and then have sort of the ship's AI or something decide that it needed to wake her up. So it
right.
was
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
his love for her that was the cause of her waking up, but it wasn't direct action on his part.
Yes.
You needed to show him more desperate and damaged and more sort of, going over the edge to the point
Mm,
where either he couldn't really be held responsible for that action or someone
yeah.
else, maybe a ship's AI could have done that. Because it did, yeah, it gave me definitely the ick. I was like, he's just
Mm,
condemned her to death. She didn't consent to this is not part of
mhm.
the, small print on this situation. There's no, like, decision tree where she allowed for this to happen.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, it did I wouldn't say it ruined the movie for me, but I certainly, like, it made me feel like, "Oh, no."
It feels like once that initial premise is set up, it then does a lot to apologize for it. Like, it gives her the option of going back to sleep. Like, I think they have like a med bay pod or something where like you can go back to sleep if you want to, which is a bit like because then you're basically looking someone in the eye and going, I will, and you're going to die on your own," which is a difficult thing to do. So it sort of implies consent at the end, but once again, it's kind of it's yeah, like you say, there could have been something done at the beginning which kind of didn't make him completely responsible. I also like when he's watching her videos that they really emphasize he's falling in love with her on an intellectual level, because he laughs at like one of her jokes as opposed to being like, Jennifer Lawrence is right there and I really fancy her, and it's completely superficial. So yeah, I like that moment as well, just to be like, look, this guy isn't just, he isn't just a prick. He's into her on an, into her mind as well as her body.
Yeah, yeah, or, you could have had it be part of the instruction manual if there's no way that you contemplated this situation not happening if you're writing the user manual for a multi-generational stasis chamber, cryo
Mhm.
sleep, colony ship situation. If someone accidentally wakes up, maybe you have to wake one person up and he, really wants it to be her, but he like tries to make it fair by like drawing straws or something or rolling
Yeah,
dice
yeah,
or,
yeah.
making it a thing of chance. And then maybe he like slightly tips the deck or something. Maybe it's like
Yes, yeah.
ambiguous which one it is and he like slightly nudges it because he is, maybe you can sort of play with that. But I think the thing that made me feel about it was that it didn't really address how intense a decision that was.
Yeah, almost because the kind of the film wanted to be on a level and what that character would have to do and what would have to go through in order to I think they sort of imply that maybe he's suicidal by sort of going out into space or something, but yeah, it's all very, sort of gently done and you don't see him sort of essentially going mad. He gets sad and he drinks a lot, but that's sort of about it really.
And a reminder to subscribe to the Bugle channel if you're a listener, and that all of the books and shows that we discuss here will be in our show notes, and there's a link to our affiliate store there. That brings us to the end of this week's episode of Realms Unknown. I apologize for my stuffy head. If you are willing to forget some of the toxicity around Rick and Morty, or even if you're into toxicity, why not give the new series a go and enjoy some fun animated comedy playing with sci-fi tropes? Then get your phalanges dancing and check out one neurodivergent hero that Tom likes, Temperance Brennan in Bones by Kathy Reichs. And you should absolutely read The Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells, or Witch King, which I'm now enjoying. The Murderbot Diaries is now a TV adaptation called Murderbot, and you can find that on Apple TV. Tom, have you got anything to plug or recommend of your own work?
I tell you what, so I'll plug. I'm on do sort of art things on Etsy occasionally with a sci-fi bent. So Tom Neenan art, just giving a rollout of some old work. I both got the Hauntening, which is available, which is a horror series which I made with BBC. Which is still available, I think, through Penguin Audiobook, so give that a listen. And also, Tom Neenan is Not All Men, which is a sort of satirical podcast that I made with BBC Sounds a few years ago and sort of gets more relevant with every passing year, is available via BBC Audio. So Tom Neenan is Not All Men. which I sort of found myself listening to an old episode the other day and being like, oh yeah, this still is relevant, so maybe give that a go as well.
And I am on tour at the end of June, beginning of July. I will be doing my show, A Passion for Passion, about my book, A Passion for Passion. And the show will be in Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, Perth, and Brisbane. And that will be the 27th, 28th, 29th of June and the 4th and 5th of July. So check it out. If you're in any of those cities, please come. I will sign almost anything. You can find me online at patreon.com/Alice Fraser. It's a one-stop shop for all of my stand-up specials, podcasts, and blogs, as well as my writers' meetings, which you can come and join me on Zoom. Generally, we tend to write together for the first hour, and the second hour is a workshop where I give feedback and the other people give feedback. It's a really chill place. You can come along, check it out. You can keep your camera off for the first session if you're shy and just audit, is it called? You can audit the session if you enjoy it. You can sign up for very cheap over at my Patreon, or even for free just to follow the blogs and things that I do. I've started to use it as where I put everything first, because none of the social medias can really be relied on anymore to actually show the people who are interested in you any of your stuff. So that's patreon.com/Alice Fraser. This is a Bugle podcast and Alice Fraser production. Your editor is Pet Hunter. Your executive producer is Chris Skinner. I'll talk to you again next week.